My life, for 79 years, has been a conversation with flour, butter, and spice. My kitchen isn't just a room in my house, it is the house's very heart, the warm, beating center of my existence. The butcher block island, scarred with the crescent-shaped marks of 1,000 chopped nuts and the faint ghosts of beet juice stains, has been my confidant. The air itself is a kind of potpourri, a permanent, comforting perfume of cinnamon, cardamom, and the sweet tang of yeast. It is in this sanctuary that I have navigated the geography of my life, kneading dough through the grief of losing my parents, piping frosting on birthday cakes that marked the passing years, and perfecting the one creation that felt like it was, woven from the very fibers of my soul. My grandmother's recipe for what our family reverently called golden swirls. The recipe was far more than a list of instructions on a brittle, yellowed card. It was a testament, a story whispered from one generation to the next. It was the smell of my mother humming in her own kitchen, the taste of unconditional love, and the quiet pride of my own home. My granddaughter, Lauren, seemed to be the one who truly grasped its significance. Now 26, she possessed a formidable combination of a sharp business degree and an ambition that burned with the intensity of a blast furnace. From the time she was a small girl, perched on a stool and diligently helping, by spilling more flour than she put in the bowl, her eyes would shine at the mere mention of the swirls. Whenever she visited, she'd bypass the living room and come straight to the kitchen, drawn by the familiar, beckoning aroma. "Rose," she said one sun-drenched Tuesday afternoon, her hip resting against the counter, as I carefully maneuvered a bubbling, perfectly browned tray of swirls from the oven's heat. A cloud of sweet spice steam enveloped us, a momentary delicious fog. "Seriously, nobody on this planet can make these the way you do. It's some kind of sorcery." I smiled, my hands moving automatically to my apron to brush away a phantom dusting of flour. "It's not sorcery, my dear. It's just love, a bit of patience, and knowing exactly when to pull them out." She watched me, her gaze sharp and analytical as I began whisking the cream cheese, softened butter, vanilla, and powdered sugar for the frosting. Her eyes weren't just appreciating, they were deconstructing. "But it's more than that," she insisted, her tone shifting from casual praise to something more focused. "This is a brand, Rose. A genuine artisanal heritage brand. People would lose their minds for these. They'd pay a fortune." I chuckled, the sound warm in the cozy kitchen. I picked up my offset spatula and began to slather the thick, snow-white frosting over the still-warm rolls, an act I had performed thousands of times. "They're for family, Lauren. That's the whole point. That's what makes them special." I slid a warm, gooey swirl onto a plate and handed it to her. The frosting was already beginning to melt, creating pearlescent rivers that trickled into the cinnamon-laced canyons of the pastry. She took a bite, her eyes fluttering closed in that familiar theatrical expression of pure ecstasy that always made my heart swell. She stayed for dinner, a simple affair of roast chicken and potatoes, but her mind was clearly elsewhere. As I washed the dishes, she returned to the topic, her voice now calibrated to a more serious, thoughtful pitch. "Rose, I've been thinking a lot about this. You're not getting any younger, you know, and that recipe card, it's practically turning to dust." My heart gave an involuntary, painful squeeze. She was right about the card's fragile state, but her clinical assessment of my age stung more than I wanted to admit. "I just worry about it," she continued, her voice softening into a carefully crafted mask of concern. "What if there was a fire, or a leak? What if it just got lost? The whole legacy, our family's history and a taste, it would just vanish. Poof." She paused, letting the dramatic image hang in the air between us. "Could I maybe, I don't know, just hold on to it for safekeeping? I have a fireproof box at my apartment. I could get it professionally scanned and laminated. I just want to protect it. For us. For the future." I looked at her then, my brilliant, beautiful granddaughter, so full of fire and what I believed to be a profound reverence for our family's history. Her concern felt so authentic, so deeply rooted in a desire to preserve the one thing I held most dear. A wave of overwhelming love washed over me, quieting the small, hesitant voice of doubt in the back of my mind. She was the future, after all. "Of course, dear," I said, my voice thick with unshed tears. I dried my hands on my apron, walked over to the old carved wooden recipe box on the shelf, and lifted the lid. There it was, my grandmother's elegant script on the fragile, butter-stained card. I handed it to her, the paper feeling as delicate as a moth's wing in my work-worn palm. "You take good care of it," I whispered, the words a prayer. She wrapped her arms around me in a tight, fierce hug. "I will, Rose. I promise. You won't have to worry about a thing." A month dissolved into the calendar, then a second. Lauren's visits, once a weekly fixture, became sporadic, then non-existent. Her phone calls dwindled from long chats to brief, distracted check-ins. Whenever I brought up the recipe card, her voice would take on a breezy, dismissive tone. "Oh, it's totally safe, Rose, locked up tight. Don't you worry your pretty little head about it." The casual condescension was new, a tiny splinter under the skin. A knot of deep, formless unease began to tighten in my stomach, a cold premonition that I tried to ignore. One afternoon, I resolved to be more direct. I called her cell. "Lauren, honey, I'd really like to have the recipe card back, please. The annual St. Jude's bake sale is next month, and Father Michael specifically requested my golden swirls. It feels wrong to make them without the card in the house." There was a pregnant pause on the line, followed by a long, weary sigh that crackled with static. "Rose, you don't actually need the physical card for that, do you?" Her voice had a distinct edge now, a sharp impatience that set my teeth on edge. "Surely after all these years you know it by heart." The implication was clear. My request was foolish, sentimental nonsense. "I do know it by heart, Lauren," I said, my voice remarkably steady despite the tremor that had started in my hands. "That isn't the point, it's my card. It was my grandmother's. It belongs in my home." Another sigh, this one louder, freighted with the exasperation of a busy executive dealing with a tedious interruption. "Look, I am absolutely slammed, right in the middle of a massive project launch. I'll try to bring it by when I have a spare second." She hung up before I could respond. The massive project was unveiled in spectacular fashion 2 weeks later. My next-door neighbor, Sharon, a kind woman with an addiction to local news gossip, rushed over one morning, holding her tablet out like a piece of evidence. "Rose, you need to see this," she said, her brow furrowed with concern. She showed me an article from the city's glossy business magazine. The headline screamed, "Creme & Company, local millennial entrepreneur reinvents a classic, launching to viral success." And beneath it, a large, professionally shot photograph of Lauren. She was standing in a starkly minimalist, industrial chic bakery, a triumphant, calculated smile on her face. The article was a gushing paean to her business acumen, her innovative, modern take on a classic family recipe, and how she was single-handedly disrupting the artisanal pastry space. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. Creme & Company. My golden swirls. I called her immediately, my heart hammering against my ribs. Her phone went straight to a polished, professional voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. My panic curdled into a cold, sickening rage. Finally, late that evening, she picked up, her voice clipped and distant. "Rose, I'm in a board meeting." "Lauren, what have you done?" I asked, my own voice a stranger's, shaking with a fury I hadn't felt in decades. Sharon showed me the article. "Creme & Company? That is my recipe. Those are my golden swirls." There was a chillingly calm silence on the other end of the line, a void where a denial or an apology should have been. Then she spoke, and her words were the stones that shattered the window of my world. "Rose, let's be realistic for a moment. You were never going to do anything with it. It was a sentimental relic sitting in a dusty box. I took that recipe, and I made it into something. I built an empire." "You stole it," I whispered, the words hollow, catching in my throat. "You lied to my face." Then came the final devastating blow, delivered with the casual cruelty of a sociopath. "Stole it? Oh, Rose, don't be so melodramatic," she said, and then she laughed. It was a short, dismissive, condescending sound that cut me deeper than any insult. "Your memory isn't what it used to be, is it? You were happy for me to have it. You practically begged me to take it. You're getting a little confused these days. A little senile. Maybe we should have a serious talk about getting you some professional help." The line went dead. I stood motionless in the center of my warm, silent kitchen, the phone still pressed to my ear. The echo of that one word, senile, carving a black, empty hole in my heart. She hadn't just stolen my recipe. She had stolen my memory, my competence, my very identity. And in its place, she had tried to install a feeble, confused old woman. The months that followed were a suffocating fog of helpless anger, and a sorrow so profound it felt like a physical illness. Cream and Company wasn't just a success, it was a phenomenon. It became the backdrop for 1,000 Instagram posts, a status symbol for the young and trendy. I'd see them on my granddaughter's social media feed, which I couldn't stop myself from checking, a form of self-torture. These glamorous strangers taking stylized bites of my golden swirls, which they now called creme rolls, or the Lauren. They praised her visionary genius, her entrepreneurial spirit. Lines snaked around the block from her sterile, polished concrete and brushed nickel bakery downtown. She was interviewed for magazines, featured on morning talk shows, hailed as a titan of industry who had captured lightning in a bottle. Every glowing review, every fawning article felt like a fresh, personal betrayal, a public erasure of my entire life. My name, Rose, was never mentioned. I was relegated to a footnote in her fabricated origin story, a cherished but vague family memory that she, the brilliant innovator, had cleverly reverse-engineered and perfected. I attempted a small, futile rebellion. I baked a double batch of the real golden swirls for the St. Jude's bake sale, just as I always had. My old friends, the ones who had eaten them at my table for 50 years, rallied around me. "These are the originals," Marge Peterson announced loudly to anyone within earshot. "This is the real thing, made with love, not that overpriced, soulless nonsense downtown." It was a comforting gesture, but it was like trying to put out a raging forest fire with a teacup of water. My small, quiet act of defiance was completely drowned out by the deafening roar of Lauren's marketing machine and the relentless tide of public opinion. The pain of her betrayal became a constant physical weight in my chest. I would walk through my own home, the place where I had raised my children and always felt completely in charge, and feel like a specter at a feast. Her accusation of senility became a persistent, insidious whisper in my own mind. Had I been a fool? Had my love for her been a form of blindness, obscuring the avarice that was so clearly there? I began to question my own memories, to doubt my own mind. The sheer, calculated cruelty of her strategy was breathtaking. She had used my love for her as the key to rob my house, and then tried to convince me I'd not only left the door wide open, but had forgotten where I lived. One afternoon, the mailman delivered the final, definitive insult. It was a thick, glossy postcard from Cream and Company. On the front was a hyper-stylized, professionally shot photograph of one of my golden swirls, artfully lit and dusted with powdered sugar, looking more like a piece of jewelry than food. On the back, a slick printed message, the taste of a modern tradition, now shipping nationwide. And nestled below it, a handwritten note in Lauren's familiar loopy cursive, "Thinking of you. Hope you're doing well. Love, Lauren." This wasn't an olive branch, it was a victory lap. It was a spike driven into an open wound. It was her, telling me without a shred of doubt that she had won, that my legacy was now a commodity for her to sell, and that I was nothing more than a quaint, irrelevant memory she could afford to be sentimental about from time to time. I stared at the postcard, at the stolen, airbrushed image of my life's work, and the profound sorrow that had been weighing me down for months began to transmute. It hardened, it cooled, it crystallized into something sharp, cold, and absolutely resolute. She thought I was a senile old woman. She was about to discover just how sharp my mind and my memory truly were. That night, sleep was a foreign country I couldn't enter. The words senile and confused ricocheted inside my skull, a cruel, endless taunt from the granddaughter I had once adored. I felt utterly powerless, a ghost in my own story. Unable to lie still, I wandered into the spare bedroom, the quiet, dusty space that had become an unofficial museum of my late husband Stanley's life. Stanley had been a planner, an engineer by trade, and a pragmatist by nature. He was a man who believed in blueprints, contingencies, and the unassailable logic of the fine print. He was the solid ground to my often dreamy sky, the perfect balance to my more creative, and as I was now painfully aware, often naive spirit. I ran my hand over the smooth, cool surface of his old oak desk, a comforting, familiar gesture. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. A photograph, a forgotten letter, just some tangible connection to a time when my world felt solid, predictable, and true. On impulse, I pulled open the deep-bottomed drawer, the one that always stuck with a groan of protest. It was filled with the detritus of a well-ordered life. Old tax returns, warranties for appliances we no longer owned, and his heavy, worn leather briefcase. I hadn't brought myself to open it since he passed away 5 years ago. It felt too final. Tonight, it felt like a necessity. My fingers, clumsy with a strange mix of grief and anticipation, fumbled with the tarnished brass latches. They clicked open with a satisfying, definitive thud. The scent of old leather, paper, and Stanley's faint, lingering pipe tobacco filled the air, a scent so evocative it was like he was in the room with me. On top of a stack of neatly organized files was one labeled in his precise, all-caps architectural handwriting, Household Intellectual Property. My brow furrowed. What on earth could that be? I lifted the folder out. Inside were a few minor patents for clever little gadgets he had tinkered with in the garage, but then my eyes fell on something else. Tucked securely inside a heavy-duty, archival-quality plastic sleeve was a crisp, official-looking document from the United States Patent and Trademark Office. The letterhead was imposing. At the top, in bold, authoritative letters, it said, Trademark Registration Certificate. And below that, the registered mark that made my breath catch in my throat. Rose's Golden Swirls. The date on the certificate was from over 10 years ago. I sank to the floor, the document trembling in my hands as the memory, once hazy, came rushing back into sharp, vivid focus. It was after I'd won first prize at the state fair for the 10th consecutive year. Stanley had sat me down at the kitchen table, a serious expression on his face. "Rosie," he'd said, taking my flour-dusted hands in his. "This recipe of yours is special. It's more than just a pastry. In the eyes of the world, it's an asset. You never know what the future holds. People can get funny when there's value involved, even family. We're going to protect it, officially." I had laughed. I remembered that clearly. I told him he was being a silly, overcautious goose, that it was just for us, for our family. But he had insisted, with that quiet, immovable stubbornness of his. He handled all the bewildering paperwork, presented me with the final certificate with a proud flourish, and told me to put it somewhere safe. And then, in the whirlwind of life, of raising a family, of growing old, of losing him, I had simply forgotten. The document, my forgotten shield, lay dormant in his briefcase, waiting. Tears streamed down my face, but for the first time in months, they weren't tears of sorrow or helplessness. They were tears of profound gratitude, of overwhelming love for the man who was still looking out for me, still protecting me from the world, even from beyond the grave. Lauren thought I was senile, but my clear-thinking, pragmatic, wonderful husband had ensured that even my own forgetfulness couldn't be used as a weapon against me. He had left me a sword, and as I sat there on the floor, clutching that certificate to my chest, I finally knew exactly how I was going to wield it. The next morning, I woke with a jolt, not to the familiar weight of despair, but to a surge of pure, unadulterated purpose I hadn't felt in years. It was like a light had been switched on in a dark room. I showered, dressed in my best navy blue suit, my power suit, Stanley had always called it, and drove to the downtown offices of Garrison Lee and Associates, the prestigious law firm that had handled Stanley's will. Mr. Garrison, a senior partner with kind, intelligent eyes and a handshake as firm and reliable as his legal reputation, had known Stanley for 30 years. I had called his secretary ahead of time, saying only that I needed to discuss a sensitive business matter of some urgency. I sat across the vast, polished mahogany desk from him in his corner office, which overlooked the entire city. The trademark certificate lay between us like a loaded pistol. I told him everything. I didn't cry or waver. I laid out the entire sordid story with a calm, cold precision that I know would have made Stanley swell with pride. I detailed Lauren's initial fawning sweetness, the calculated deception to obtain the recipe card, the shocking launch of Kremen Company, the relentless social media campaign, and finally, the cruel, condescending phone call and the gloating postcard. I made sure to repeat the word she used, senile. Mr. Garrison listened with the intense focus of a hawk, his expression shifting from professional sympathy to a quiet, simmering indignation on my behalf. When I finished, he picked up the certificate, holding it carefully by the edges. He examined it with a practiced eye, noting the registration number, the filing date, and the precise, legally binding description of the goods. Bakery products, namely, cinnamon-style sweet rolls. A slow, satisfied smile began to spread across his face. "Well, Rose," he said, his voice a low, confident rumble, "your husband was an exceptionally smart and prescient man. I remember him talking about this. Said your baking was blue-chip stock. This document is ironclad. Your granddaughter, or rather her corporation, is engaged in blatant and willful trademark infringement." He proceeded to explain the legal jargon in plain, empowering English. I didn't just have a case, I had a legal battering ram. He meticulously laid out my options. We could immediately send a cease and desist letter, demanding she halt all use of the recipe and the name, and then file a lawsuit for statutory damages, punitive damages, and a full disgorgement of every single penny of profit she had made from her theft. The thought of her empire crumbling, of her losing everything, was undeniably tempting. A flash of righteous, vengeful satisfaction. But then what? I'd be left with a check, a hollow victory. My legacy would still be a story of theft, my name still a footnote. "What if," I said, leaning forward in my chair, an idea that had been germinating in the back of my mind overnight suddenly blossoming into full, vibrant color. "What if I don't just want her to stop? What if I want to take it all back? The right way?" Mr. Garrison raised a silver eyebrow, intrigued. "What exactly do you have in mind, Rose?" I took a deep, steadying breath. She built her business on the lie that I am old and useless. She thinks I belong in a nursing home, knitting and waiting to die. I want to open my own bakery, right here, in this city. I want to sell Rose's Golden Swirls, the original, the authentic, and the trademarked version. I want to reclaim my name, my recipe, and my story, not in the sterile silence of a courtroom, but in the heart of my own bakery, with flour on my hands and the smell of cinnamon in the air. Mr. Garrison stared at me for a long moment, his professional mask melting away into a look of genuine admiration. A broad, delighted grin broke across his face. He leaned back in his large leather chair and steepled his fingers, looking at me as if for the first time. "Rose Callahan," he said, a chuckle in his voice. "That is the most magnificent, poetic, and legally sound instrument of revenge I have ever had the pleasure of encountering. Let's get you a business loan. I know just the banker." The following 2 months were a dizzying, exhausting, and utterly exhilarating whirlwind. Armed with a meticulously drafted business plan from Mr. Garrison's firm and a small business loan secured against the equity in my home, a terrifying gamble that felt more right than anything I had ever done, I transformed. I was no longer a grieving widow or a forgotten grandmother. I was a founder, a CEO, and a woman on a mission. My first strategic move was finding the perfect location. After a week of scouring listings, I found it on Elm Street, a beautiful, neglected old storefront that had been a dusty, forgotten bookstore for decades. It had enormous front windows perfect for displays, good, solid bones, and an original pressed tin ceiling, hidden under ugly acoustic tiles, that I knew would be absolutely stunning once restored. Best of all, it was just 3 blocks away from Cream, and company close enough to be an unmistakable direct challenge. The renovation became my entire life. I was on site every single day from dawn until dusk, a thermos of strong coffee in one hand and a roll of blueprints in the other. I oversaw contractors with an iron will, picked out paint colors, a warm, buttery yellow to evoke sunshine and a crisp, clean white for the trim, and personally designed the layout of the entire space. I wanted it to feel like an extension of my own kitchen, welcoming, comforting, authentic, and completely without pretense. I spent a full, frustrating week with an industrial kitchen supplier, testing a dozen commercial ovens until I found one that could replicate the specific, even radiant heat of my 50-year-old Montgomery Ward oven at home. This venture wasn't about cutting corners or maximizing profit margins. It was about honoring the integrity of the recipe. It was about perfection. I hired a small, dedicated staff, not by sifting through resumes, but by looking for passion in people's eyes. I didn't want trendy 20-somethings who saw this as a stepping stone. I wanted people who understood what I was building. I found Mariah, a retired baker from Italy with forearms like steel and true magic in her hands, and young Tom, a culinary school dropout, who was more interested in the soul of food than in the science of molecular gastronomy. They respected the recipe, they respected the history, and most importantly, they respected me. The best part of it all was the baking. In the weeks leading up to the grand opening, the three of us tested batch after glorious batch of the golden swirls, fine-tuning the process for the larger scale. The intoxicating aroma of cinnamon, cardamom, melting brown sugar, and warm bread filled the entire block, a form of guerrilla marketing more powerful and alluring than any social media campaign Lauren could ever buy. People would stop on the sidewalk, their daily commutes interrupted, sniffing the air with expressions of pure, unadulterated delight. The local news station caught wind of the story. Local baking legend Rose Callahan, 79, to open bakery on Elm Street, featuring famed family recipe. They didn't have to mention Lauren or Cream and Company directly. Mr. Garrison had advised against that for now, letting the story tell itself. But the subtext was delicious and clear to everyone. The town was buzzing. I was no longer hiding in my house, nursing my wounds and feeling invisible. I was building something real, creating something tangible and beautiful out of my pain and anger. Every single decision, from the precise font on the hanging wooden sign to the brand of locally roasted coffee we would serve, was mine. One evening, standing alone in the nearly finished bakery, surrounded by the smell of fresh paint, sawdust, and the lingering sweetness of the day's test batch, I caught my reflection in the large, clean front window. I saw a woman with streaks of flour in her gray hair, dark circles of exhaustion under her eyes, and a look of fierce, unyielding determination. I wasn't the ghost of my former self. I was more alive, more me, than I had been in years. Grand opening day arrived on a crisp, perfect Saturday in October, the kind of autumn day that feels like a gift. We unlocked the doors of Rose's Golden Swirls at precisely 7 a.m., and by 7:05, there was a line of people stretching down the block and around the corner. It seemed as though the entire town had come out to support me. There were my old friends from church, my neighbors, former colleagues of Stanley's, and hundreds of curious strangers, all drawn in by the burgeoning local legend, the irresistible story, and the incredible, heavenly aroma that now permanently perfumed this corner of Elm Street. The atmosphere inside was electric, buzzing with a warmth and excitement that had nothing to do with the ovens. It was pure, unadulterated community joy. We sold out of our first 300 golden swirls by 9:30 a.m. We had to put a small, apologetic, sold out for today sign on the door, promising to double the batch for tomorrow. Inside, the bakery was everything I had ever dreamed of. Loud, happy, chaotic, and filled with people connecting and enjoying my life's work. Around noon, as I was wiping down a flour-dusted counter, feeling a pleasant ache in my bones, the little bell above the door chimed. A sudden, palpable hush fell over the remaining customers who were lingering over coffee. I looked up. It was Lauren. She stood frozen in the doorway, her face a mask of pale, furious disbelief. She was dressed in her typical armor, a severe, all-black designer pantsuit that looked utterly alien and out of place in my warm, buttery yellow shop. Her eyes scanned the happy crowd, the bustling staff, the hand-painted signs, and finally, they landed on me. She strode toward the counter, her expensive heels clicking an angry staccato rhythm on the beautifully restored hardwood floor. "What is this?" she hissed, her voice a low, venomous whisper that was somehow louder than a shout. "What in the world do you think you're doing?" I calmly finished wiping the counter, folded my cleaning cloth with deliberate slowness, and met her enraged gaze. I felt no fear, no anger, only a profound, bottomless, and sad clarity. "I'm running my business, Lauren," I said, my voice perfectly even and clear. "I'm selling my Rose's Golden Swirls." "Your swirls?" she scoffed, her voice rising in pitch and volume, cracking with incredulity. "I built this brand. I made this famous. You are a confused old woman who stole my business idea." A few nearby customers gasped audibly. I just allowed myself a small, sad smile. No, my dear, you stole my recipe. You stole my family's legacy. And then you tried to gaslight me, calling me senile to justify your theft and clear your conscience. I reached under the counter and produced a sleek, professional-looking folder that Mr. Garrison had prepared for this very moment. I slid it across the smooth wooden counter to her. This, I said, tapping the first document, is a certified copy of my United States trademark for the name Rose's Golden Swirls, filed and registered over 10 years ago. And this, I added, sliding a second thicker document on top of the first, is a formal cease and desist letter from my attorneys at Garrison, Lee and Associates. It states that you have 30 days to cease all production and marketing of any product using my proprietary and trademarked recipe, to change the name of your corporation, and to remove all infringing materials from the public domain. If you fail to comply, we will proceed to sue you and your corporation for all profits, plus treble damages for willful infringement. Lauren's face went from pale to ashen. She stared down at the documents as if they were venomous snakes, her hands trembling so violently she couldn't bring herself to touch them. Her arrogant, polished smirk had vanished completely, replaced by the raw, panicked look of a cornered animal. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a potent cocktail of hatred, disbelief, and shock. She simply could not process it. The senile, irrelevant old woman had not only fought back, but had comprehensively outmaneuvered her. She opened her mouth to speak, to lash out, but no words came. She just stared at me, the woman she had dismissed, belittled, and written off, now standing as the undeniable, legally fortified owner of the empire she had stolen. Without another word, she spun on her heel and fled from the shop, leaving the legal documents and the ruins of her fraudulent enterprise lying on my counter. The fallout from our confrontation was swift, public, and spectacular. The cease and desist letter, backed by the irrefutable power of the federal trademark, did its job with brutal efficiency. Faced with an unwinnable, ruinously expensive legal battle and the public relations nightmare of the decade, Lauren's venture capitalists pulled their funding almost overnight. Cream & Company closed its doors less than a month later, its sleek, minimalist sign taken down in the dead of night as if it had never been there. The local papers and city food blogs, which had once fawned over her, now had a field day with the real story, the great swirl heist, how a grandmother reclaimed her stolen legacy. The carefully constructed narrative of the brilliant young entrepreneur was obliterated, replaced by a more sordid and more truthful tale of elder exploitation, breathtaking arrogance, and epic hubris. Lauren vanished from the public eye, becoming a pariah in the very community she had worked so desperately to conquer. I heard through the strained family grapevine that she had sold her apartment at a loss and moved out of state, disgraced, ostracized, and deep in debt. She never tried to contact me again. There is a deep and undeniable bittersweetness to it all, of course. A part of my heart will always ache for the loss of my granddaughter. The bright-eyed little girl who stood on a stool in my kitchen, her face dusted with flour and her smile full of pure joy, is gone forever, replaced by a cold, grasping stranger I no longer know or understand. Some nights, when the bakery is quiet and I am alone with my thoughts, that loss is a sharp physical pain. But then the morning comes. I unlock the door to my bakery, and I am greeted by the smiling, loyal faces of Maria and Tom, and by the glorious, life-affirming scent of cinnamon, butter, and yeast. I see my name, Roses, in beautiful, elegant gold leaf on the front window, shining in the morning sun. I watch as the tables fill up with families, with old friends catching up, with young couples falling in love, all of them sharing a moment of simple, profound joy over something that I created. They are making new memories, their stories now woven into the fabric of my own. I didn't just get my recipe back. I built a new life from the ashes of my old one. I discovered a purpose I never knew I was looking for. I proved to the world, and far more importantly to myself, that I was not a relic. I was not a burden. I was not senile. I was a baker, a businesswoman, and the fierce, proud guardian of a legacy that proved to be stronger than greed and more resilient than betrayal. My golden swirls are so much more than a recipe now. They are a story of resilience, a testament to standing up for oneself. It is a story I get to tell every single day, with every batch I bake, and I have learned that the sweetest revenge isn't bitter at all. It's warm, dusted with cinnamon sugar, and generously slathered in cream cheese frosting. It's the taste of taking back your life, one delicious, trademark-protected golden bite at a time. My legacy is finally secure, not on a fragile, yellowed piece of paper, but in the heart of a thriving business, a vibrant community, and in my own rediscovered strength. And that is a form of success that Lauren, for all her ambition, could never have possibly manufactured.